Hey everyone, Daphne here. I'm a mom of two, a volleyball coach, and a handcrafted enthusiast. In this video, we're going to talk about what happens at your first OB appointment. There's a lot to go over here, so let's get into it. I live in Canada, in a province called Ontario, so all of my experiences are from the perspective of someone under the Ontario Health Plan. In Ontario, when you know you're pregnant, you get a choice between an OB or a midwife. In the beginning, I didn't even know if I wanted an OB or a midwife. I have a pretty close relationship with my family doctor, and she recommended a certain OB. When I got home from my doctor's appointment that day, I researched what a midwife was, and I realized I would really want one. But I ended up connecting very well with my OB from the first appointment and decided to stay with her. In the end, I ended up having some risk factors in my pregnancy that meant I wouldn't have been able to go the route of a midwife anyways. Let's talk a little bit about timelines first of all. I made an appointment with my family doctor as soon as I got a positive pregnancy test. I got a positive test at 4 weeks and 3 days with my most recent pregnancy, and I saw my doctor 2 days later at 4 weeks and 5 days. At this doctor's appointment, my family doctor spoke to me about some risk factors and recommended some prenatal vitamins. She also provided me with a requisition for a blood test. The blood test would definitively confirm if I was pregnant. With my first child, there were some concerns of an ectopic pregnancy, which is not a viable pregnancy. So at that time, I was recommended to have an ultrasound done. But those concerns weren't an issue for my daughter, and so at that appointment, I was not recommended to do an ultrasound. Even though I saw my family doctor as soon as I knew I was pregnant, and even though my family doctor sent in the recommendation to see the OB as soon as she saw me, I still didn't get to see my OB until I was about 10 or 11 weeks pregnant. My OB doesn't actually see patients before 10 weeks pregnant. With this most recent pregnancy, I saw my OB for the first time at 11 weeks and 3 days pregnant. The first time around, this seemed really late. I was almost into my second trimester and I still hadn't seen my OB. But what I'm told is that in Ontario, at least, this is actually quite common. Those timelines are likely different with a midwife, but for an OB in Ontario, it is not uncommon for you to go several weeks before seeing your OB. Once I got to my first appointment, the same thing that typically happens when you go to any healthcare provider happened. So I had to go in a little bit early to fill out some paperwork. That was registration with my OB clinic as well as registration papers to fill out with the hospital. I was also given some paperwork that described the timeline of pregnancy from start to finish, as well as the tests that are typically recommended within that time frame. Also at that time and every other appointment, I always booked my next appointment. In the first 2 trimesters, you go to your OB about once a month. In your third trimester, you may start to go to your OB once every other week. At 35 weeks pregnant, I was seeing my OB every week. At the start of every OB appointment, they took my blood pressure and they would weigh me. When I was pregnant with my son, of course, my husband was able to come to my appointments with me, which was really helpful because sometimes he would hear or remember things that I wouldn't. My daughter was conceived and born during a global pandemic, and so for those appointments, I had to go by myself. At my first appointment, I had to do a urine test, but it wasn't as glamorous looking as the take-home kits. I was given a little tiny strip of paper with a colored end on it. Once I peed on it, the end changed color and I had to go show the receptionist the color of the strip. That was it. Okay, so after all that, I can finally sit down and talk to my OB. She introduced herself and she asked me a ton of questions about my family medical history. She asked me if I knew when the first day of my last period was so that she could determine my due date. She let me know that this due date may change, but everyone uses the same calculation, so she was able to tell me what she thinks the due date would be. She went through the pregnancy timeline and talked about which tests are done when, and some of the risks that are involved at any stage. She went through the pregnancy timeline with me, and she described some of the tests and screening that might need to be done, as well as the risks associated with those tests. She recommended foods to avoid and asked me if I'd started taking prenatal vitamins. She asked me if I got my flu shot done, which I had. At every single appointment, my OB would take out a fetal Doppler, and she would try to hear the baby's heartbeat. She did let me know that sometimes in the beginning it is hard to pick up a heartbeat, and that doesn't mean that my pregnancy isn't viable, but luckily we were able to pick it up from the first appointment. She then asked me if I had any questions, and I did have a lot of them. My OB took the time to calmly and completely answer any question that I had. I've heard some pretty bad stories of people's experiences with their OB, but quite frankly, I had a really good relationship with mine. She had a good bedside manner, and she never made it feel like I was wasting her time. There's some literature online that says that your OB performs a Pap test, but if you've been up to date with your Pap tests, then your OB will likely just go by those current records and not need to do a new one. And that was about it. That was the whole appointment. In total, it was about half an hour long, and then each subsequent appointment after that was maybe 15 minutes long if I didn't have any questions. So here's some pro mom tips for your first OB appointment. The first tip is bring a notebook with you. Pregnancy can be really overwhelming and there's a lot of information to take in. So bring a notebook to write down things that are said so you don't have to remember it all in the moment. Little plug here, if you get the pregnancy planner, there's actually a spot for medical appointments. The pregnancy planner comes with 16 medical appointment sheets. You can use these to write out your notes. You can use these to write out your questions or concerns beforehand. It's a good idea to think about your questions ahead of time or as you go through the month. Write them down when you think about it, and then when you go to your appointment, you can just go down your list of questions. Keep in mind that all your questions don't have to be physical concerns. Your questions should include any concerns that you have about your mental health or dietary concerns as well. And pro tip number 2, keep transparency with your OB. If you have any traumas or triggers that may come up during any time of your pregnancy journey, I recommend that you let your OB know. Your OB can put that information in your file so that anyone who treats you later has that information. Sometimes it can be really scary to share that information, but if you allow them to put that information into your file, then it means that every person who looks at your file afterwards will take that into account when dealing with you. And along those lines of transparency, it's really important to let your OB know if you have any fears or anxieties about being pregnant. Your OB has likely seen everything under the sun, and probably nothing is going to surprise them. I let my OB know that I was kind of terrified of giving birth, and she was really sympathetic to me and encouraging. And that's really it. That's your first appointment. The first OB appointment can be really information-packed and really overwhelming, but at the same time, it can be really exciting and a wonderful start to your pregnancy journey. I hope this video was helpful to you to describe what it's like to go to your first OB appointment. As always, if you had a similar or really different experience, then I want to know. Or maybe you didn't have an OB at all. Maybe you had a midwife. If you leave a comment down below, I'll be sure to read it and respond to you. And if you click the link in the description below, you can buy the pregnancy planner. If you're in those early stages of pregnancy, I definitely recommend buying the pregnancy planner. This planner has fillable calendars for every step of the journey from day 1 to week 40. It has checklists to help you plan out every corner, every item of your pregnancy, your delivery, and your baby's needs. It also has weekly and monthly status pages where you can keep track of baby's growth and your symptoms and mental health. Super helpful when you're visiting your medical care provider. It makes a wonderful gift for a mom-to-be or as a personal keepsake. While you're at my website, you can check out my other creations as well. I make cards and stickers and pins and baby toys and everything. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram at daffodils.designs and at pregnancyplanner.ca. Thanks for watching!